Yes, I have made beautiful music to this with this Lotus Esprit chassis. After much prep, and probably not enough to be honest, it's about to do a tour of the body shop and get a fresh coat of primer in the spray booth. But before that, I'm going to hit all the rear suspension parts we've already prepared together. Check out those videos if you're just tuning in with paint. Normally, I'd shield you from having to see the same thing twice, but in a classic case of, yeah, they've been known to do that, sir. Part of the inner race of the wheel bearing on the second drive shaft was seized onto the stub. Yeah, I said stub. Patron Richard. He, formerly of Lotus, Jaguar Land Rover, and now of Mercedes AMG Formula 1 fame. There'd be a clank as I dropped his name, but everything's made of carbon fibre these days. Anyway, he decided to jinx me last video by saying how easy I made taking prop shaft UJs out of yokes. Look, so instead of telling you all about how these ones fought me, I'll keep that for a patron behind the scenes video in the immediate future. I'll just do this. You know what it's like, not wanting to touch a hot shaft. I had to give in, owing to not having a solid mounted vise, and also to having borrowed the bearing puller, thanks Mark, and not wanting to work someone else's tool too hard. And if I go on talking about this job, the hits are just going to keep coming, so I leave it by dunking this tight ring in some lube overnight, and go back at it in earnest, using my own tool. Waka waka. There's tons of archaeology constantly going on through this resto. Ow! That was me slapping myself for using that phrase. First thing here is these UJs are very new looking, and it's a shame to remove them, but the shafts are too ropey not to restore. It's ironic too, because the circlips have been painted over, so whoever did the UJs took the time to paint the shafts too. Time to paint, and Gar came in to put me on the right track, and he let me use what is the new school of professional paint guns. The nozzles on these things are all plastic. What was I saying about everything being made of composites these days? Anyway, you might wonder as you look across these parts about painting brake calipers with epoxy primer. I did. So I went looking for answers. I consulted the paint supplier who said the calipers don't get that hot, in paint terms, on road going cars anyway, and that it will be fine. And then I found an article on Brembo's own website that flat out listed epoxy primer as an important stage in their caliper paint system. And as if by design, a great testimonial for epoxy primer's durability came up after this round of paint. So these parts were sprayed last thing on a Friday evening. On Monday, I found I hadn't gotten all of the brake fluid out of the calipers and some had dribbled out and across the fresh paint. If you've ever found brake fluid on some paintwork, you'll know that if it's been there any length of time and you rub it, it'll leave a perfect outline of the spill in bare metal. Well, not today. I got lots of runs here and there, and I'm going to make an excuse. The borrowed gun had a finer nozzle size than I'm used to spraying epoxy with, and epoxy's a relatively thick paint, so Gar put some thinner in the mix to help the paint flow better. And I'm just not used to the thin stuff. And by the way, I'll stand by the decision to leave all of the machine surfaces unmasked. I got the coverage I wanted, and I'd rather spend the time removing paint from a few places than I've tried to mask tricky areas and end up removing paint anyway. You know, there are lots of little relics on this frame, little reminders that a human did all the folding, and a human did all the welding. There's the odd dot of welding spatter, and even a little wire sticking out of a joint here and there. It's a funny thing, if I weren't making videos about it, I'd have left them on. But for better or worse, these videos will stand some sort of testament to what Lotus was in the 1970s, and it's something I'll talk to you about again before the end of this video, let alone the end of this build. Anyway, the last thing I did before taking the chassis downstairs for paint was to knock the sharp edges off some of the tabs that hold clutch and brake lines. I didn't do all of them, just the ones in places where I've already lost skin or can predict losing it in the future. mentioned the sweet sound of a lightweight Lotus. I suppose technically this car was the last of the Chapman-sired machines at Lotus and one of the first of the new heavier stable. It must have been difficult for at least some people at the sports car factory that it didn't weigh less than a ton. Getting it below that mark is a challenge we'll accept later in the build. For now, all the new bits look great. But don't let the flattery of the lens fool you. This chassis is 45 years old, and despite having sat dormant and indoors for nearly half of that time, it was fairly ravaged by rust all over. Almost everyone who sees it tells me I should hit it with a good build of primer and flat it back, but I don't see the point. Nature has lightened it for me, and fine, it must have lost some of what little stiffness it had, but I'm not about to fill it full of material that isn't doing anything but satisfying some need for a nice aesthetic. That plus the fact that the whole thing, every flipping nook and cranny, now has to be rubbed down again in preparation for some nice black top coat. That's coming up right here on Soup Classic Motoring channel. Subscribe, hit the like switch, and check out the link in the description for ways to get more content, stickers, and stitch stuff. Big thanks to new patrons John Mafraz, Andrew, Jonathan Coulson, Stuart Matthews, Simon Gusiaz, and Etienne Lashuite. That's it for now. Stay tuned, stay stuck in, and good luck.